In 1929, a British railway painted over the workshop windows so nobody could see what was being built inside. In America, they built a locomotive so long it barely fit on a turntable for a luxury train that was cancelled before it ever ran. In the Soviet Union, an engine with 14 driving wheels was quietly hidden away because it destroyed the track beneath it. These machines were real. Almost nobody saw them. Nearly all of them were destroyed. Number 10. Krauss-Maffei ML4000. In 1961, two American railroads did something almost nobody expected. Southern Pacific and the Denver and Rio Grande Western went shopping, not in Pennsylvania, not in Illinois, but in Munich, West Germany. The problem was simple. Both railroads had mountains. Southern Pacific had the Sierra Nevada, the Rio Grande had the Rockies, and in the diesel era, American locomotives moved power from the engine to the wheels using electricity. A diesel engine spinning a generator, feeding traction motors on the axles. It worked, but on long, punishing grades at crawling speeds, those traction motors got hot, and hot traction motors burn out. The Germans had a completely different answer. Hydraulic transmission. No generator, no traction motors. Instead, the diesel engine drove a torque converter, essentially transmitting power through moving fluid, and then a drive shaft turned the wheels. In Germany, on the Deutsche Bundesbahn, this worked beautifully. So Southern Pacific and the Rio Grande each bought 3 Krauss-Maffei ML4000 diesel hydraulics. They arrived by ship. They came in a striking, distinctly European car body that looked nothing like anything else in North America. And on paper they were monsters, around 4,000 horsepower from a single unit, at a time when a typical American road diesel was making well under half that. And then reality hit. America is not Germany. American freight trains are longer, heavier, dirtier, and dustier. The tunnels on Donner Pass and the snow sheds filled these machines with heat and grit. Air filters clogged. The hydraulic transmissions beautifully engineered, but engineered for a railway with a very different maintenance culture. Needed specialists and spare parts that had to cross an ocean. Rio Grande gave up quickly and sold its 3 units to Southern Pacific. Southern Pacific persisted, even ordering a second, larger batch a couple of years later in a more conventional American-style hood body. But the experiment was finished by the end of the 1960s. Every single one was retired, and almost all were scrapped or stripped for parts. Some were even reduced to cables power sources for other equipment. Only one survives. Southern Pacific 9010. One of the later hood units was saved, and today sits in California at the Niles Canyon Railway, having been restored to running condition. It is the last physical evidence of the strangest import in American railroad history. Number 9. Chapelon's 242A1. If you ask steam locomotive engineers, the real ones, the ones who spent their lives with thermodynamic tables, to name the finest steam locomotive ever built, a surprising number of them will not name an American or a British machine. They will name a Frenchman's rebuild. His name was André Chapelon. He was an engineer of almost obsessive precision, and he understood something most locomotive builders barely thought about, that a steam locomotive is fundamentally a heat engine, and that most of them were shockingly wasteful. Steam was being throttled, choked, and strangled on its way through the machine. Chapelon widened the steam passages. He redesigned the exhaust. He built compound locomotives, machines that use the same steam twice, first in a high-pressure cylinder, then again in a low-pressure one. In 1946, in the aftermath of the war, he took a failed, unloved 3-cylinder locomotive and completely rebuilt it into something extraordinary. The 242A1, a 484 compound. The results were frankly absurd. On test, this single locomotive produced power figures that no other European steam locomotive had ever reached, commonly cited at over 5,000 horsepower. It could take trains up gradients at speeds that left the crews of conventional engines simply astonished. It was, by a wide margin, the most powerful steam locomotive Europe ever produced. And here is the tragedy. France, in 1946, had already decided its future. That future was electric. Post-war reconstruction poured money into overhead wires, not fireboxes. The 242A1 was a magnificent answer to a question that France had already stopped asking. Only one was ever built. It was never developed into a class. It was never mass-produced. It was withdrawn, and in 1960 it was cut up for scrap. Not one part of the most powerful steam locomotive Europe ever built survives. There is no museum piece. There is no cab you can stand in. There are photographs, test data, and a handful of people who saw it work, and every one of them said the same thing. They said it was the finest thing on rails. Number 8. LMS Turbomotive 6202. Here is the thing about a steam piston. It is violent. A piston slams forward, stops dead, and slams backward thousands of times a minute, and every one of those reversals hammers the machine and hammers the track. Engineers have hated this since the beginning. So in 1935, Britain's London, Midland and Scottish Railway did something radical. They took the frames of a brand new express passenger locomotive, a Princess Royal Class Pacific, and instead of cylinders and pistons, they fitted a steam turbine. The design was Swedish in origin, from the Ljungström Company. A large turbine on one side drove the wheels forward through gearing. A smaller, separate turbine handled reverse. There were no pistons, no connecting rods slamming back and forth. The locomotive, No. 6202, became known simply as the Turbomotive, and it half worked, genuinely. On the main line from London Euston to Liverpool, hauling heavy express trains, the Turbomotive did what a turbine does best. It ran smoothly and efficiently at sustained high speed. Crews reported it was noticeably kinder to the track. When it was working, it was a very good locomotive. But turbines have a weakness. They love constant, steady output. Railways do not offer constant, steady output. They offer starting, stopping, standing in stations, restarting. And under those conditions, the Turbomotive was thirsty and less efficient than the pistons it replaced. Worse, it was a one-off. When something broke, there was no spare on a shelf. It spent long periods sitting in works waiting for parts. It soldiered on through the 1930s and 1940s, genuinely a working locomotive, not just an experiment, until turbine blade failure finally ended its career at the end of the 1940s. Then comes the ending nobody would write. British Railways decided to rebuild it into a conventional locomotive. The turbines came out, cylinders went in. It emerged as a normal Pacific and was named Princess Anne. It entered service in 1952, and within about 2 months, it was caught in the Harrow and Wealdstone disaster of October 1952, one of the worst rail accidents in British history. The locomotive was damaged beyond any hope of repair and scrapped. Britain's boldest steam experiment survived 15 years as a turbine and less than a season as a normal engine. Number 7. Soviet AA-21. In 1934, at the Voroshilovgrad Locomotive Works in the Soviet Union, engineers built something that has never been built before or since. A locomotive with 14 driving wheels in a single rigid frame, 7 coupled axles. In American notation, a 414-4. Let me put that in perspective. A Union Pacific big boy, the largest successful steam locomotive ever built, has 16 driving wheels, but they are split into 2 separate groups on a hinged articulated frame, precisely so the thing can go around a corner. The Soviet AA-21 put all 7 driving axles rigidly in one frame. The logic was Stalinist in the purest sense. More axles means more weight on the drivers, which means more tractive effort, which means longer, heavier trains hauling coal and steel across a continent. On paper, the numbers were spectacular. It was a triumph of the 5-year plan. On track, it was a disaster. A rigid wheelbase that long simply cannot negotiate curves. The flanges ground into the rails. The locomotive reportedly spread the track, pushing the rails apart, and derailed. It was effectively a machine that could only run in a straight line on a railway network that stubbornly refused to be straight. And here is the political dimension, and it's important. In the Soviet Union in the 1930s, a prestige project of this scale did not simply get cancelled. Failure was not an administrative inconvenience, it was dangerous. The locomotive was not paraded, not celebrated, not developed. It was quietly shunted out of sight, effectively withdrawn from meaningful service and left in storage. It sat for years, decades in fact. and in 1960 it was quietly scrapped without ceremony. Only one was ever built. It never entered normal service. It is the largest rigid-framed steam locomotive ever constructed, and virtually nobody in the world ever saw it move. If you want a single object that explains what happens when politics designs a machine instead of physics, that's it. Number 6. Union Pacific. Number 80. To understand this one, you need to know what Union Pacific was already doing. Through the 1950s, UP ran the largest fleet of gas turbine locomotives in the world. Genuine jet engine technology on rails. The biggest of them, the enormous big blow turbines, produced around 8,500 horsepower and were among the most powerful locomotives ever built. Crews said you could hear them coming for miles, a shrieking, howling roar rolling across the Wyoming plains. But they had a problem. They burned oil. Specifically, a heavy, cheap residual fuel oil. And as the 1950s wore on, the petrochemical industry got better at cracking that residue into more valuable products. The cheap fuel stopped being cheap, and Union Pacific looked at what it hauled every day. Coal, mountains of coal. Coal that it owned in vast quantities in the ground. So in 1962, Union Pacific attempted something genuinely audacious, a coal-burning gas turbine locomotive numbered 80. The idea was to crush coal into fine particles and burn it in the turbine directly, a jet engine running on rock. You can probably already see the problem. A gas turbine works by spinning a set of extremely precise blades in a stream of hot gas at enormous speed. It is exquisitely intolerant of anything solid in that gas stream. And coal, unlike oil, leaves behind ash and abrasive mineral particles. Those particles hit the turbine blades at high velocity, over and over, thousands of times a second. The result was inevitable. The blades eroded. Coal ash fouled the machine. Every attempt to filter, treat, or clean the exhaust stream added complexity, weight, and cost. Union Pacific tested number 80 for a few years in the 1960s, quietly out west, largely away from public eyes. It never entered regular revenue service in any meaningful way. The project was abandoned and the locomotive was scrapped. Only one was built. It is one of the very few locomotives in history that tried to be a coal-fired jet engine, and it is one of the least photographed machines Union Pacific ever owned. Number 5. Norfolk and Western TE1. Norfolk and Western was the last great steam railroad in America, and it was steam for one very unsentimental reason. NEW hauled coal. NEW was owned effectively by coal country. Buying diesel fuel meant buying oil, and oil was the product of its competitors. So while every other American railroad dieselized, NEW's engineers asked a desperate question. Is there any way to keep burning coal? The answer they built in 1954 was called the TE1. The crews named it Jawn Henry after John Henry, the steel-driving man of American folk ballad who beat the steam drill and died with his hammer in his hand. It was not a steam locomotive. Not exactly. It was a steam turbine electric. Inside was a high-pressure water tube boiler, closer to a power station boiler or a naval boiler than a locomotive one, built by Babcock and Wilcox. That boiler fed a steam turbine. The turbine spun generators. The generators fed traction motors on the axles, all 12 of them. The whole thing was assembled by Baldwin Lima Hamilton with the electrical gear from Westinghouse, and it was colossal, around 4,500 horsepower and roughly 600,000 pounds riding on 6 trucks. Standing beside it, it looked less like a locomotive and more like a rolling power plant, which is essentially what it was, and it worked. That's what haunts this story. John Henry could start heavy coal drags out of Appalachian yards with a smoothness a conventional steam engine couldn't match, because electric traction motors deliver torque from a standstill. But it was staggeringly complex. It combined every maintenance headache of a steam boiler with every maintenance headache of an electric locomotive, and then added the sensitivity of a turbine. Coal dust got into the electrical equipment. The boiler demanded carefully treated water. Every fault needed a specialist, because there was exactly one of them in the world. Norfolk and Western tested it, fought with it, and finally gave up. Jawn Henry was scrapped in 1958, just 4 years after it was built. The last serious attempt to save coal-fired railroading in America lasted 4 years, and then the diesels won. Number 4. C&O M-1. This is my favorite story on this list, because it is not just a failed machine, it is a failed dream. In the mid-1940s, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway was run by a man named Robert R. Young, a genuinely brilliant, genuinely combative financier who thought American passenger trains were a disgrace. He wanted to build the finest train in America, a luxury streamliner called the Chessie, running through the Virginias with observation cars, a cinema, and standards of comfort that would shame the airlines. And the C&O was a coal railroad, so the Chessie would be pulled by coal. Baldwin built 3 of them, delivered in 1947 and 1948, numbered 500, 501 and 502, Class M1. And they were, quite simply, gigantic. Around 106 feet long, one of the longest single locomotive units ever built in the United States, around 6,000 horsepower, a coal bunker at the front, a steam turbine driving generators, feeding traction motors, the same basic idea as Jawn Henry, but bigger and built for speed rather than drag freight. They were beautiful. They were streamlined. They were painted for a train that did not exist because the Chessie was cancelled. Post-war passenger traffic did not boom the way Young had gambled it would. The airlines and the automobile were already eating into the market. The luxury streamliner that these 3 magnificent machines were purpose-built to haul was quietly killed before it ever entered service. So the C&O had 3 of the most expensive, most specialized locomotives in the country, and nothing for them to pull. They were tried on other trains, and they failed there too. The coal dust from the front bunker fouled the electrical equipment. They were unreliable. They were maintenance nightmares. And they were far, far too specialized to be adapted into general service. All 3 were withdrawn and scrapped around 1950, within roughly 2 to 3 years of construction. Some of the most spectacular locomotives ever built in America, built for a train that never turned a wheel, and gone before most people had ever heard of them. They were, in the truest sense, magnificent orphans. Number 3. Pennsylvania Railroads 2. Number 6200. Every locomotive so far that used a turbine used it to make electricity. Turbine spins generator, generator feeds motors, motors turn wheels. The Pennsylvania Railroad in 1944 did something nobody else in America ever did. They connected the turbine directly to the driving wheels through gears. No generators, no traction motors. A steam turbine geared straight to the axles. It was built by Baldwin with Westinghouse turbines, and it was numbered 6200, Class S2, and it is the only direct-drive steam turbine locomotive ever built in the United States. There's a beautiful accident in its design. The PRR wanted it on a 4/8 wheel arrangement, but this was 1944. The middle of the war, and lightweight alloy steels were needed for actual weapons, not experimental locomotives. Denied the alloys, the engineers had to use heavier conventional steel, which made the locomotive heavier, which meant it needed more wheels to spread the load. So it came out as a 686, 6 leading wheels, 8 drivers, 6 trailing wheels, a wheel arrangement that exists in the entire history of world railways, essentially because of a wartime metal shortage. And when it ran, it was uncanny. There were 2 turbines inside, a large one for forward, a small one for reverse. With no pistons and no reciprocating rods slamming back and forth, the S2 accelerated with a smooth, continuous, rising howl instead of the familiar 4-beat chuff. Crews described it as sounding like nothing else on the railroad. At high speed on the Fort Wayne line, it was genuinely impressive, powerful, smooth, and easy on the track. But turbines hate low speeds. At a standstill and while starting, the S2 drank steam at a catastrophic rate, burning coal and boiling water for very little output. Every stop was expensive, and the reduction gearing and turbines needed care that a roundhouse full of steam fitters was not equipped to give. The Pennsylvania Railroad retired 6200 in 1949 after roughly 5 years and scrapped it in the early 1950s. America built exactly one, and then never tried again. Number 2. Bulleid's leader, Oliver Bulleid, was a genius. Ask anyone in Britain. He was also, depending on who you ask, either a visionary or a menace, and the leader is why. Bulleid looked at the steam locomotive in the late 1940s and concluded correctly that its real enemy was not the diesel's efficiency. It was the diesel's convenience. A diesel could be driven from either end. It didn't need turning. It didn't need a crew shoveling coal in an open cab. It rode on bogies, so it was gentle on the track. So Bulleid asked, "What if we build a steam locomotive that behaves like a diesel?" The Leader, completed at Brighton in 1949 and numbered 36001, looked like a diesel. It had a full enclosed body. It had a cab at each end, so it never needed turning. It rode on two powered bogies with all wheels driven, effectively 0660. It used sleeve valves, a sophisticated design borrowed from aero engines instead of conventional valve gear. And in the middle of it, sealed in the center of the locomotive, between the two drivers' cabs, was the firebox and the fireman. Think about that. The driver sat in an enclosed cab at the front. The fireman was locked in a hot steel box in the middle of the machine, shoveling coal, with no forward view and desperately little ventilation. The heat in that compartment during trials was, by every account, brutal, genuinely dangerous. Crews hated it. On top of that, the weight distribution was badly wrong. The sleeve valves gave endless trouble, and the whole locomotive was far heavier than it was supposed to be. Several were ordered. Only one was ever completed and tested. The trials ran through 1950, went badly, and British Railways, now nationalized, now counting every penny, and now openly planning for diesels and electrification, pulled the plug. The Leader was scrapped in 1951. Almost nobody outside the test crews ever saw it run. And the people who did see it run mostly remember one thing: the man in the middle, climbing out, drenched, half-cooked, and furious. Number 1. The LNER Hush-Hush. And here it is. The one that earns the title of this video, literally. In 1929, Sir Nigel Gresley, the man who would later build Bulleid, the fastest steam locomotive in history, was working on a locomotive so unorthodox and so commercially sensitive that the London and North Eastern Railway deliberately concealed it. The workshops at Darlington were screened. Access was restricted. The press was told nothing. The railway press, being the railway press, found out anyway and gave it the nickname it has carried ever since. The Hush-Hush. Officially, it was LNER Class W1, number 10,000, a 464. And what made it secret was what was inside it. A marine-type water tube boiler built on principles borrowed from the Royal Navy by Yarrow, the shipbuilders. Every normal steam locomotive uses a fire tube boiler. Hot gases run through tubes surrounded by water. A water tube boiler flips that. Water runs through tubes surrounded by fire. Naval engineers use them because they can handle far higher pressures. Where a good express locomotive of the day worked at maybe 220 pounds per square inch, the Hush-Hush was designed for around 450 psi, roughly double. And with that pressure, Gresley used compounding. High-pressure cylinders exhausting into low-pressure ones, using the same steam twice. The theoretical fuel savings were enormous. If it worked, it would rewrite British locomotive design. It did not work. The boiler was a persistent, expensive headache. Steam production was inconsistent. It spent far more time in the works than on the road. It ran on and off through the 1930s, the most watched, least seen locomotive in Britain, and it never came close to justifying itself. And in 1937, the LNER did the only sensible thing. They gutted it. Out came the water tube boiler. In went a big conventional one, wrapped in the same streamlined casing style as Gresley's A4 Pacifics. It ran on, in that rebuilt form, as a perfectly ordinary and reasonably useful express locomotive until 1959, when it was withdrawn and scrapped. Only one was ever built. Nobody was allowed to see it while it was being built. Almost nobody saw it in the form it was designed to have, and nothing of it survives. It is, quite literally, the secret locomotive. If there's a locomotive you think belongs on this list, and I know there are more, because there are always more, Put it in the comments. I read them.